So, welcome to Living with Purpose and another episode with Courtney Roberts. Courtney is actually, I love her title. I mean, her organization is called Moonshot Global Consulting, and she is the managing director and founder. But also, she is a fellow academician. She is a faculty member at the Graduate School of International Service at the American University, where she delves into public policy and international development. And we're going to have a conversation about her journey, her expertise, and then talk a little bit about why purpose is so important in the work that we all do. So please welcome Courtney Roberts to Living with Purpose. Courtney, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
I would love for you to just talk about your journey. Courtney, as a child growing up, and why this field and why you think what you're doing is critical. And then, of course, share a little bit about Moonshot Global.
Sure. Thank you. So actually, I grew up in rural Indiana, a town of 18,000 people that in the canal and railroad days had 25,000 people and was growing fast. In its wisdom, it turned away Purdue University in favor of the state mental institution, state hospital. And it's a little bit indicative. They had a very tight knit of, I guess, the equivalent of robber barons running the town. And they really didn't want to let in any outside ideas. And so growing up as a young girl there, I realized that, this was almost a bit of a story for what I wanted to move away from, was this very inward looking approach to protecting what you had for fear of change and outside influences, and really embrace this view of being a citizen of the world. And so the first step to do that was to, work to get outside of my town. And I started my studies at Georgetown University, and that really propelled me to a lot of international work. I was a child of the balance of power and was in Poland during the evolution of power to democracy, and returned there in 91 to work as a journalist in the emergent independent press. I eventually found my way back to the United States and started working in global development. And I still focus in that area today, although I had a bit of a pit stop in international banking where I got the knowledge on innovative finance that I bring to the work at Moonshot Global. My perspective has always been international. And I think it's because I grew up in sort of the heartland where at a time when there was this real conflict between preserving what you had and really adopting sort of a broader worldview on things. Sort of an interesting reflection on that these days as we have the same tension in the United States.
So talk just a little bit to add a little bit more color to your life and, some of the experiences that you've had. Share a little bit about some of the formative pieces that helped you grow. And then, the time that you spend in Poland, because that sounds actually quite exciting and interesting for a young person to have gone through.
I think that the biggest influences on my life, I guess, pre-professional, were really the knowledge that work connects all of us, and that really what people want in the world globally is a way to have a livelihood, to care for their families, to educate their children, to empower those children to kind of reach to the heights that they can reach. And why do I bring that up? Well, the very first job that I had was detasseling sweet corn. And in Indiana, there's lots of corn. And I wanted to, have the ability to go out and experience life and go to certain summer camps. And my parents said, fine, do that, earn some money, do that. So I started working, and I started working alongside, people with relative, even to me, with no experience to go beyond this, their station in life. I worked with a single mother who was on my crew, and here I was a 13-year-old. And then when I started doing work overseas, this is the thing I also experienced, is people really wanted to essentially have a livelihood that they could build and grow and provide for their families. So my interest in global development was always a way to connect people up to work that they could do, that they could follow, that would help them realize essentially their dreams. And the immediate dreams that people have are providing for their family. They do that usually in a very passionate way, whether that's being a farmer of sweet corn or, working on global development to help build livelihoods of others. That's maybe a bit philosophical, But when I was in Poland, the connected up to this ability to do the work, they wanted to do it in a system that actually was supportive of opportunities for all, but in a way where effort was also rewarded, right? So this was what I experienced in Poland, was this sort of move from system that wanted power over to a system that enabled people to empower themselves to kind of expand even their country and their economy beyond what those, who wanted power over would have for them.
So talk a little bit about international development and the work that you're doing with Moonshot Global. Why Moonshot Global? What are you doing? What are some of you just talked about, at the different places that you've worked in, and what are you hearing from there?
So I started Moonshot Global after 10 years at the World Bank Group. I worked at the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency and the International Finance Corporation. And the most of my work was working with countries to help them attract investment and to work with those investment intermediaries to connect their local supply chains to these foreign direct investors who would come up. And when I left the firm, or I left and started the firm, really what I saw was the opportunity to focus a little more on the impact that's being created through the work, rather than simply counting the amount of investment coming in and the number of jobs that people are getting from these investments, to really go beyond to look at how is this ability for people to develop their livelihoods really changing the reality for them and allowing them to really empower themselves and provide for their dreams and their futures beyond simply the numbers. And we began focusing on innovative finance and innovation-led development to help our clients focus, again, not only on the numbers, going beyond the numbers, and think through how they actually deliver the work and how they engage with the local communities to deliver real impact beyond the numbers.
So to give a few examples, and again, explain before you give the example, Moonshot Global, how did you come up with the name? And why the name?
Right. Okay. So the name comes from actually an article in the New Yorker magazine in the United States that a lot of people enjoy reading because it has thoughtful articles. And it was actually coverage on Google and Google Books Project. And it was talking about how Google was simply digitizing books left, right, and center. There was no commercial interest that they had. There was no real reason to do it. They did it simply because it was there and because it was a risk that they needed to take to step outside of what they knew and to eventually find this daunting enterprise. They wanted to democratize knowledge and really take a moonshot. They had it in two separate words to do something daunting because it needed to be done, and that they would sort out the demand for it and the commercial value for it later. And so I was very comfortable at International Finance Corporation in a great job in an investment climate team for Africa, working along, but really constantly felt this tug of wanting to focus on the impact that was being created by the work that we were doing. On the face of it, International Finance Corporation invests in activities that commercial investors won't do because there's some kind of an impact at the end. But nobody really knows what that impact is. They do have groups of people to measure, but really fall short on figuring out what's happening on the ground to the people who are meant to be the beneficiaries of these investments. So increasingly, this was gnawing at me, and I decided to leave IFC and start the firm with this focus of helping all range of clients. And I've worked in more than 50 countries, where from social enterprises to big donors, to foundations, to countries themselves, to take another look at how the work is delivered, what mechanisms are they using to partner, how are they actually delivering impact to, I guess, the end users or the beneficiaries in the communities where they're working. And I can give you a couple of examples. One of the most interesting projects that we've worked on, and I worked with a local team of 8 people in the Democratic Republic of Congo, was to work in the education sector that the World Bank was having outcomes-based activity they were delivering. And the government of Democratic Republic of Congo would stand to get an incentive payment if they proved that they were incorporating the voice of citizens and into the education reform. And so our project developed a mechanism that got the feedback from teachers and parents all around schools in Democratic Republic of Congo on whether or not aid was being delivered into those locations. So in this case, it was an example of some operational projects that we do. And we do optional projects on the ground like this, where we actually think through how to engage the communities in delivering the information on whether or not they're feeling any of the benefit of the projects. And we enabled them with mobile reporting devices to report back on whether there were teachers in the classrooms, whether they had books in the classrooms, whether there were latrines being built for girls. And on this basis, the World Bank made decisions to reinvest into this activity in an environment where previously they pretty much relied on the governments to tell them what was going on. So that's one example. And another example, just quickly, is a much more high-level example where we worked with bilateral donor, the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. And we worked with them to think through their partnering approach on a series of activities that used innovative finance. And we helped them figure out, well, what is the impact they're actually trying to deliver, and how can they measure that through digging deep into the structure of the way they're implementing their partnerships, moving beyond the transactional into capacity building, shared ownership, adaptive strategies, continuous learning, and risk sharing to deliver finance to small and medium-sized enterprises focused on gender and climate activities. And that was a bit more of a policy approach, but we engaged people all across the agency to sort of have a second look at the things that they were delivering and articulate their strategy. This was at a time when the Australian government was deciding whether or not to redouble their efforts in blended finance. And the result of this highly co-created sort of framework and mechanism for partnering was a six-fold increase in resources for this type of work through these blended finance mechanism, which were kind of a new thing for global development over the last 10 years.
This is great. Again, this whole story that you've laid out is how somebody growing up in a very small community in the US, and it could be any part of the world, kind of starts looking at the world outside of where they're growing up. And from that, really trying to figure out what are the global connections that actually drive all of us forward rather than just very localized connections. And I think your work, whether it is through international finance, through media, and what you're doing now at Moonshot Global is all about kind of unraveling some of these interesting connections so that we can actually, in a world, really see what impact is happening as globalization and global flows of funding kind of go across the world. Thank you very much for sharing your insights as to how you have developed. Let's shift a little bit to talking about the importance of purpose and why is purpose important to you and how does purpose show up for you when times get tough?
Well, purpose is, I think, what I was talking about partnership before. And purpose for me, it's a basic element. It's that what actually makes unique the livelihood that you do. You know, there's lots of research and quotes about how many hours we spend doing work and how it's the thing that we engage in the most in our lifetimes. And, you know, we all know that human beings are complex creatures with brains and personalities and souls. And the idea of, I guess, the counter argument of working without purpose to me seems so anti-human that, you know, that this could have come from my roots in a small place where people did look inward and connect with each other. But it's just one of the major compelling forces for me, and it always has been. I think that the work that I've done and how that's played out is, again, through this perspective of working collaboratively with others to help them feel empowered and be able to reach their own goals that they have, whether that's caring for their families or taking this global perspective where they're connecting up even their countries to the global economy. I think true partnership and true collaboration is a journey of growth. where all the partners kind of walk together toward a shared goal and each bringing their strengths to the table and enriching each other. And this is a very purpose-driven perspective, but this is what I've learned over the course of my work, that, when you're working in environments and you always need others in your work, and that these partnerships, people bring their own strengths to the table and they enrich each other. And at the end of the day, the lasting partnerships are those that are driven with purpose.
So let's end with you sharing with us your one golden nugget, a piece of wisdom that you want to leave the listeners with.
I guess the very simple thing is that the foundation of every successful partnership is not just shared vision, but shared values. And that if you bring a quality, desire, and passion to your work, and you keep a global perspective, but understand the place you came from, that really is the way to open up possibilities to extend your work beyond what you could have imagined.
Thank you very much. To our listeners, this is something that we have been hearing continuously with all of our guests that have come, but also many of the speakers that are coming into my classroom are all talking about how they first and foremost lead with their values. They jot down their values, whether it's 3, 4, 5, put it up on a board, look at it every day, adhering to their values, but they try. That is what purpose is all about. It is really trying to figure out your values and your strengths and then showing up with authenticity. Courtney, thank you so very much for being part of this podcast. Again, to all of our listeners, remember, purpose is that renewable source of energy that drives humanity forward. It is in your power to turn on your purpose. Please do so. And thank you till our next episode for listening to us. Courtney, thank you so very much.
Thank you very much, Akhtar.